What's up, guys? Today we're going to build a full stack to-do app with PHP, MySQL, and JavaScript, and of course HTML and CSS for the design. So I've gotten a lot of messages and comments asking me if I can do some kind of little full stack app demonstration, so here we are. This app is pretty simple. It's just like your typical to-do app, but unlike every other tutorial on YouTube for to-do apps that is just JavaScript with local storage, again, this is actually full stack where there's a database hooked up. We're using PHP and a little bit of JavaScript so that you can see how all the languages work together. I kept the PHP code as simple as possible so that you can see how PHP works. That means this isn't like fully optimized for a production app to launch online. There's still some security features that we could add, and I'll probably actually add those features and launch this live online in my complete web developer course, so you can check that out if you want in there, if you want to get the full picture of how to deploy a real website. But for this one, we'll at least get the basics of PHP and full stack apps. Just to give you a quick demo, like if we can add something in here like workout, and then click our add button, and then it'll submit to PHP in the database and then render onto the screen here. Now we have workout, and now our tasks went from 0 out of 0 to 0 out of 1. We have a little task counter here. If we put like go to the mall, we can put eat food. Now we have 3. So our task counter is keeping up with what's going on. If we check one off that we did it, it'll get crossed out and go kind of gray, and then we'll have 1 out of 3 tasks completed. Check off 2, that'll update. We can delete a task, and then we can clear all tasks. Okay, and then we'll get this little "Are you sure?" message, and we'll hit OK. All right, so pretty simple functionality. But again, you'll learn a ton from this. You'll learn how to set up a database, how to use PHP and JavaScript together. What we're going to do first is build the front end for this, because you should always, at least I recommend, building the front end first with just HTML and CSS so that you can see what's going on before you add your programming. It makes your life a lot easier because you'll know exactly what functionality to build where. So remember that, guys. Always build the front end of your application first. Build it as a static website, and then go ahead and fill in the programming later. So that's what we're going to do here. This video is sponsored by the Complete Web Developer course. If you'd like to go from 0 to full stack developer in the fastest way possible with 100% project-based learning, this is the perfect course for you. We teach full stack PHP because PHP runs over 73% of the internet today. If you don't know PHP, guys, you're missing out. This is a 100% project-based learning course. We build over 30 projects in total, starting with simple HTML, then going into CSS, JavaScript, and then PHP. Where at the end of the course, we build a full stack PHP content management system. The average runtime of every lesson in this course is 5 minutes or less, so that you can learn in quick, bite-sized little bits, which is the best way to learn. You don't want to be spending an hour for one video trying to follow along with a new subject that you're not sure about yet. So we took care of that for you. If you're interested in signing up, go ahead and check the link in the description. Alright, guys, so let's get started building this out together. So I've already got my server going with MAMP here. If you're on Windows, you might want to download XAMPP. If you don't know what MAMP or XAMPP are, you're completely lost and you're like, what is he even talking about? I'm going to link a video in the description about how to install PHP on your system. It's part of my course that I released as a free course preview, so check that and go to the description below and start at that video first. It'll help you get PHP installed using MAMP or XAMPP, and then it'll explain what all of this is. This is basically just a server that you have to run on your computer so that your computer can interpret and understand PHP code locally so that you can build full stack apps on your computer before you launch them to the real web. And that's what you need to have on your computer if you're going to be building this project with me. Again, check that video link in the description if you need to install that first and you need to learn about that. So it'll be down there for you. So I've got my MAMP running. Let's go ahead and create a project folder for this, and I'm going to call mine full stack to do app. And then I'm going to launch my file finder here. Now I'm on Mac, guys. If you're on Windows, obviously you'll be doing stuff. It'll look a little bit different because you're on Windows, but it's all still the same stuff. You're going to go into your MAMP or XAMPP application. So I'll at least show you that, right? So this is my MAMP folder. Yours might say MAMP or XAMPP. And remember, all of the files that you want, if you just came from that tutorial video, if you already know what I'm talking about, and then your htdocs folder is what's going to host all your files up in your actual browser. So we have to click and drag our folder here into htdocs. So I'm just going to drag this over here. Yes, there we go. Now we got our full stack to do app in our htdocs area. And now let's go ahead and I'm going to open up a new window in Visual Studio Code. That's what we're going to be using for this project. And I'm going to drag the full stack to do app folder over here. It should just be an empty folder. Very cool. All right, and then we can get started here. So make this a little bit smaller. We'll make our project a little bit bigger. And this is just the design that we're going to copy and go off of to get started together. So let's get our files created here. So I'm going to start off. Now I'm going to make an index dot, and not HTML, guys. Remember, we're doing PHP full stack, so it's actually going to be index.php. And that's the cool thing about PHP, guys, is it's like it seamlessly integrates with HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So like everything that we do, if all of you've ever known is full stack, or not, if all you've ever known is front end development, like HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript, which is 99% of the people in the world, a lot of this is going to look very familiar to you, just with a little bit of differences, like .php. Now in our .php, we can still do our HTML boilerplate, because you can write HTML right in PHP pages, no problem. You can combine PHP and HTML, which you're going to see here with this project. Everything, like I said, seamlessly integrates. That's why learning full stack PHP, especially as a beginner who only knows front-end languages, is just the best way to go, because it integrates right away. Arrays are arrays, functions are functions. 99.9% of the stuff you learned with JavaScript already goes right over to PHP, so it's not much of a learning curve. So there we go. We got our boilerplate code like we always do with all of our projects when we're doing front-end stuff. Now, one thing that we're going to do, if we go down here, and well, actually, let's make our CSS. Let's say style.css file, and then we'll do our app.js file. Okay, so I want to connect my style.css. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say link, and then you'll see that when I hit tab, I'm not getting my full link tag because it's not going to autocomplete, because right now we're in PHP mode in Visual Studio Code. Down here it tells you what language you're in. Select language mode. You can click on this, and even though we're in a .php file, I wanted to interpret this as HTML right now, so that I get all my auto code completion and my auto code formatting. I want all of that to come back. So I'm just going to type in HTML up here and click on it. And I'm just now our language mode is on HTML. So I just told Visual Studio Code, hey man, I'm going to actually be writing some HTML for a while. So let's switch to that mode, and then I'll go back to PHP when I want to write PHP. And it goes, okay. So it switches it for me. So now we'll get all of our code completion, everything back. So if I do the link and I hit tab, now it's automatically going to do the code completion for me. It's going to get my real style sheet, and then I'm going to be able to do style.css to connect this. You'll see we're going to do that several times in this tutorial when I want to switch back to HTML and PHP, because I have to do stuff and I want my formatting and everything to come with it. So that's a normal thing of doing PHP code in Visual Studio Code. And so let's make the title of our web page. We'll say full stack to do app. And now let's launch this in our htdocs folder on our actual local machine. So to do that, we have to go to localhost, and I'm personally on 8888 for my port. See all these 8s here? Yours might be different. Again, go through that first tutorial that I linked in the description if you need to install this and you're still unsure what's going on here. It'll explain all of this to you, okay? But bottom line is we're now in our htdocs folder that we set up earlier in our MAMP, and this is all the files in that folder. And we want to select the file that we're going to be working on. So we named ours full stack to do app. So now we're basically in our app. There's our title. Everything is working. We cannot use the go live server for PHP because we're doing PHP in Visual Studio Code's go live server. Like, you usually use it and you hit save, it auto updates your page when you're building designs. It doesn't work that way with PHP. It has to go through the PHP interpreter, which is MAMP in my case. If you're on Windows, you might be using XAMPP. It has to go through here, interpret the PHP code on an actual server, and then it puts it on the page for you. That means that there's another difference, and that's every time we want to see our changes on the page, we're actually going to have to refresh because when we save, they're not going to show up. So for example, I'll say H1 test, save. Now I'm saving, and we didn't get any updates here. Every time we have to refresh the page because we're going through the PHP interpreter, and now it'll show up. So that's another little difference. So we'll leave test there for now. There is a few things that I want to set up here. We're going to be using icons, and we're going to be using, as you can see here, these icons. These come from FontAwesome. So we're going to install some FontAwesome icons on here, and we're also going to install a Google font of Lato for our text. So let's do that now. So first, let's do our Google font. Let's just make this big. I'm going to say Google Fonts, and we'll go into Google Fonts here, and I'm going to select or search for Lato. Go to Lato, click Get Font, get embed code, and you can make whatever Google font you want, guys. I'm just going to choose Lato. If you want, choose whatever font you want. I'm going to copy the embed code here, and we'll go back up. I'm going to put this above my CSS style sheet, and then we got to grab our font here, Lato, with a sans serif backup. So let's just go. I'm going to open up the body in CSS. I'm just going to paste that in there because my whole body is going to be Lato. And now if we go and refresh, boom, now we got Lato. So that's running. We're good to go there. Now let's go. We have to get our FontAwesome icons now, or at least that's what I'm going to use to get these little text icons. So I'll show you how to do that. So let's click out of here. Let's type in FontAwesome. And then if you've never used FontAwesome icons before, guys, it's just like anytime you see an icon on a page, it's most likely using FontAwesome, or there's a couple other companies out there, but all these like little icons. And if you haven't already, you need to click this and sign up and go through the instructions. It'll just tell you to give an email address. It's a typical sign up process. And then you'll go to your kits. And then if you don't have a kit yet, and a kit is just a snippet of code that you paste into your website like Google Fonts. If you don't have a kit, you'll click add new kit and add a kit that way. And then you'll come down here and you'll eventually, this is my kit. This is my little code here. So if I click on that, this is the code. This is just basically connecting us to FontAwesome. Again, the same process. This is using a CDN, very similar to what we did with adding Google Fonts. We're going to paste it in the head of our document, and you can see it's in script tags and JavaScript tags, so that's pretty cool. It's a little bit different. So I'm going to put that above the Google font now, below my last meta tag, and now we can use icons on the website whenever we want. We're not going to use them yet, but I want that set up for now. So I'll get out of there for now. We'll come back when we need those. And let's continue to add some basic styles for our CSS. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to make a comment, and I'm going to say global styles. And we're going to do a CSS reset. So let's do asterisk to select the whole page. Say margin 0, padding 0, box sizing border box, and we'll save. Remember, we got to refresh to see the update. There we go. So our CSS reset is working. We got our body font. I want to make a container class for our whole application to wrap it in so that there's a built-in margin and padding on the sides for our design. So I'm going to say dot container, and I'm going to say width 90%, max width 1440 pixels, margin auto. So now we can test that out. We have our container there, so let's do this. In our body, I'm going to make a main tag. We'll wrap everything in a main tag to be semantic with HTML, or at least a little bit semantic. I'll put my H1 in here, cut and paste that. And then now I'm going to wrap everything inside the main tag in our container class that we just made. So I'll say container, that down here. All right, and then we'll save and refresh. And now our container is working because we're getting that margin padding on the sides here. Now, before we move on, let's make sure that we connect our JavaScript file so that when we use JavaScript in the future, it works and we're not wondering why it's not working. So, happens to me all the time, guys. I forget to connect JavaScript, and then I start writing a bunch of JavaScript. Nothing's working. I get pissed off, and then I ask AI why my code isn't working, and then AI always tells me, hey, dummy, you didn't connect it. And then I'm like, oh, duh. So let's do our script tag here right at the bottom above our closing body tag. We'll say source app.js. And then let's do an alert here to have the page tell us if JavaScript is working. So we'll say alert JS working. Save, refresh. Okay, JS is working, so good. Let's delete the alert for now. We know our JavaScript is working for the future, and we're good to go. All right, guys, so we got everything connected. Let's go ahead and start making our design. So remember, this is what we're building now. So we're going to start, work our top down. And all these are just static right now. I just made a bunch of list items so you guys can see what the app will look like. So we'll probably only make one list item and then just the clear all button. We won't make all of these. And then we'll start jumping into PHP and making our database and making this dynamic right away. But let's get this done here. So let's start with this top part. It's kind of like a score tracker or counter, just to count like how many tasks that are there and completed so far, and that'll be dynamically hooked up so that when we click this, it'll keep score of like what's completed and what's not. This will all be connected. So let's make this little part first, like our little tracker. So let's delete our H1. And we'll start making the tracker right here in the container. So I'm going to make a class on a div called to-do-tracker. And then in there will be all of our code for that. And within our to-do tracker, we're going to have two divs because this is going to be separated as like the text for the task tracker. And this is going to be like the number, right? So we're going to make a couple of divs in here. I'll just leave this up so you can see like what we're building. So I'm going to make another div and I'm going to call it task tracker text, and I'll make an H2 and I'll say tasks completed. We could make that an H1, but I'll just make it an H2. It doesn't really matter. We'll say task completed, so that's going to be that text, and then below it we'll have a paragraph and we'll have it say the class say completed subhead for subheading or completed subheading, whatever you want to put. And then in there, we're going to put keep it up. We're going to encourage our users, right? Keep going, man. Okay, so we got that. Let's see what we have. There it is. So we're getting there. All right, and now we're going to have another div that's going to house this part right here. So let's go below that div here, and we'll call this one task-counter. And I'm going to say 1 out of 3. Save, and we'll refresh. There we go. So let's start styling this up because that's all the code we really need for that little to-do tracker part. Pretty simple. So let's go to our style.css, and we can make a comment here. Say this is all the CSS code for the to-do tracker. And this, we're not going to have like a ton of CSS for this project. It's really simple, but whenever I'm doing CSS, if you built projects with me before, you know that I like to comment, like have clear comments for all my CSS and a lot of my code. I like to really comment it out and explain what's going on. That's to benefit you guys and to benefit me in the future or any other developers that open up my project. So, sometimes reading other people's code can be difficult, but when there's comments on it, it's a lot nicer. And I want all of my design to be centered. So I'm actually going to select our main tag first. So let's say main, because everything is pretty much going to be centered. So I'm going to say I want text align center, save, refresh. I want all of our form, everything to be centered. And then I'll say margin top 3 rem, just to give it some spacing off the top part. There we go. All right. And now let's select our to-do tracker, and we'll flex those 2 items together that we just made. So copy that, and we'll do this. And guys, we're building this front end out first because it's a lot easier when you're making any type of application. If you have your front end built first, you'll know exactly what you need to do, what functionality you need to do. You can see what you're actually doing, so it just makes life a lot easier. Take this as a lesson, guys. You should try to always make your front ends first. Don't just start with the programming of stuff. Make your front end first, see what your app's going to look like, and then it's really, really easy to see what functionality you need to add. You can add functionality one at a time. That's the best way to build apps so that you don't get all confused. So in our to-do tracker, we want them side by side, the 2 divs, right? So we're going to say display, flex, align items center, justify content center. So now they're side by side. Now we want some padding in between them. So to do that, we're going to use something called column gap. So a column gap 2 rem. 1 rem is like 16 pixels, so 2 rem would be 32 pixels. So if we refresh, Now they've got some separation. Now we're going to put a border around it here. So we'll say border 1 pixel, solid, and black. Okay. So you can see it's starting to take shape now. We'll make our border radius on here 8 pixels to give it some rounding on the corners, like that. And then we'll give this thing a width. We'll say width 500 pixels. And then we'll say height 200 pixels. And then if we make this big, we can see this isn't really centered in the design like we want it to be. So to do that, we're going to use the margin auto trick. So we'll say margin 0 auto, save, and refresh. There we go. And now it's nice and centered here. So we're getting there. We just got to add a few more styles. We got to add some styling to the text, and we got to make this thing circular and green in the background. Or I think I used like aquamarine color on here. So let's continue on here. Let's select our H2 heading. And for that, I'm just going to say the font size is going to be 36 pixels. And then for our subheading, let's select that class for the keep it up text. So completed subheading. Copy that class over here. Notice how I'm always copying and pasting my class names. It just avoids typos, guys. It's a really good habit to get into. So for this, I'm going to say text align. I want it to be left, at least on desktop. There we go. And I'm going to say padding top 5 pixels. We'll say font style. I want it to be italic. So let's see what we got here. There we go. I want the font size to always be 16 pixels. And then I want the letter spacing to be 1 pixel just to give it some extra emphasis and style. So if we refresh, now the letters are a little more spaced out. So it just, I don't know, adds a little bit of flair to it. Now we have to make this area green. This is like the task counter area. So we're going to do that now. So let's go select that. We'll go over here and select our task counter class. Copy and paste that in there. And for that, we're going to say background color aquamarine. Say height 130 pixels. And we'll make the width 130 pixels. So you can see what we have here. Okay, so now it's square. So now we got to center this, make this circle. I'll show you how to do that. We got to say, to make it circle, we're going to say border radius 50%, save. And to center our 1 out of 3 in here, we're going to use flex. So we'll say display, flex, align items center, justify content center, save. There we go. And now I'm going to make the font weight in here bold. There we go. And then we're going to say font size, I want it to be bigger. So we're going to say font size 32 pixels, save and update. Now you might notice that I have this spaced out a little bit so that the slash, the 1 and the 3 aren't all together. So I'll show you how I do that. I actually do that using a span element in our index.html. I'm going to go right here after the 1 and I'm going to make I'm going to put a space. I'm going to say span. And then I'm going to put the slash in here. And then we're going to give this span a class of spacer because that's really all it is. It's just going to be a spacer. And then if I go over here to my CSS and I say dot spacer and I just say padding 0 top and bottom, 5 pixels of padding left and right, and save and refresh, we got some spacing here now. So we just basically wrapped this in a span and put padding on it to separate the 1 and the 3 from it. All right, so that's our little tracker for now. Now we're going to move on to making the form part. So we're just going to make a little form with an input and a submit button that is an icon. So not too difficult here, so we'll get that done. So let's go below our tracker here. So we got our container, our to-do tracker. So right below our tracker right here, we're going to make our form. So let's say form. We'll say dot task dash form. Okay, and we're just going to have that class on there. We're not going to have an action right now. Go into our form. And we'll make our input field. So I'm going to make an input with a class of task-input. And the type is going to be text. And then we'll put a placeholder text in here. And the placeholder will say your next task is ... And then we'll make sure that this field is required. So put a little bit of HTML form validation on there. It can't be empty. So let's refresh. There we go. And then we're also going to have a submit button. So for that, we're going to use a button tag. We're going to give it the type of submit. And we'll give it a class of submit-btn. And then within the button tags, we're going to actually put our little icon to add stuff. So it's going to be like a little plus icon. So let's go to FontAwesome and grab that. So let's type in FontAwesome. Go to my search bar here. Remember, we already added our kit code, so you should already have your code in here, and you should just be able to search and add your icons now. So let's say plus, and I believe I use, let's see, this one here. FA solid, FA plus, and then I'm gonna go here to this little show styling tools icon, and I want the 2XL version. I want this to be pretty big, and then I'm gonna copy the code, and I'm gonna paste it in between my button tags, and save. And then if we refresh, we got our plus with our little button in the background, and that's all the HTML that our form requires. Really simple, just an input and an add button, submit button. So let's start styling this stuff up with CSS now. So let's grab our task form and copy that. And of course down here we can make our little comment here. We can say form, and then we'll say dot task form. And we'll give it some margin on the top. So we'll say margin 2rem top and bottom, auto left and right. Bring it down a little bit. And then we'll make sure, like, these are already going to be in line by default, but we're going to flex them and make sure that they're centered and always next to each other. So we're going to say display, flex, align item center, justify content, center, and then we'll use a column gap of 1rem to give them some padding on the sides. And if we refresh, boom. Okay, now they're spaced out there. Now we got to style up our input field. So let's grab task input class right here. Copy that, paste that over here, and we'll say width 350 pixels. We want a height of our input to be 45 pixels. So we can see that now. Okay. Our text is way over to the left, so we're going to give it some padding. So we'll say padding left 8 pixels. I don't want this blue outline when I select the form, so I'm going to say outline none. I'm going to round the form with a border radius. I'll say border radius 30 pixels. And then I'll say border, I want it to be 1 pixel, solid, and 333 for the border color. Like a dark gray. There we go, but it's not too dark. And then our font in there, I want the font size to be 18 pixels, and refresh. Cool. Now our text is a lot bigger. We can easily read it. Now let's style up our little submit button that we just made. So let's go grab the submit-btn class. And we have to basically make this button round and green like we did on the original design. So that's what we're going to be doing here. And then our icon will be centered in the circle. So I'm going to say height 45 pixels, width 45 pixels, border radius 50%, and then I'll say border none, so you can see what's going on so far. Okay, so we're getting there. And then we'll say background color aquamarine, and cursor pointer, so that I get that hand when we hover over it. So if we refresh, all right, so that's looking like the design now. And that's pretty much all we have to do for our form for now. So we can now move on to creating our unordered list with our task items. So we'll do that now. So let's go back to our index, and we'll go below our form, and we'll make an unordered list, and we'll give it a class of task-list. And then we'll have an li with a class of task-item. And then we're going to put the text for our LIs. So like right here, this will be our text. I'm going to separate that in a div. And then I'm going to separate the icons in another div so that we can flex them. And that no matter how long our text gets here, as you can see in this class or in this task that I put in here, Our divs are always over to the right. They're not all different like widths based on the text size. And our text is always pushed over to the left, and that's going to be using Flexbox. So it just aligns everything really nice and neat for our tasks. So I'm going to have a class and say li-text. And then we'll put a task in here to take out trash. Okay. And then in another div, we'll go below here, and we're going to call this one task-icons. And then we'll put each icon, each one of these icons, we're going to actually put in a button again. So we're going to say button, and we're going to give them a class of icon-btn. And then within the button, we'll do an icon, and we need to do the first one, which is the check mark. So we go back to FontAwesome, and let's go up to the search bar and just type in check. And I think I did this circle check right here. FA solid, FA circle check. Yeah, and so we'll go again and we'll make it 2XL. Copy it and paste it into our button here and save. And then refresh. Okay, so there it is. And then we can just copy this button down because we're going to be doing the same thing just with a different icon. And the next one we need to get is like the trash can icon. So let's grab that. Let's make this big. Say trash right here. Wait, which one did I get? The one with the lines? No, the solid one. Okay. So grab this one, say 2XL, copy that. And we'll paste it here. Grab the whole icon and paste it in. There we go. Go over here and refresh. There we go. So this looks pretty ugly now, but we'll fix it up with CSS. So let's go ahead and start styling this up now. So let's go to our CSS, copy this comment down, and we'll say in here, we'll say task list. And then now let's start styling up our task list. So let's go to our UL right here, grab dot, we'll say dot task list. And we're going to say display flex, align items center, flex direction columns, because they're going to stack on top of each other. Each list item is going to stack. Okay, so that brought our dot in, so that now our items, our task items are defined inside of our container and everything, so that's good. We'll say gap of 1 rem between all items. And then we're going to get rid of those bullet points, so we'll say list style none. And then we'll say padding 0, margin 2 rem top and bottom, auto left and right. So it brings everything down a little bit, and it's going to make our items, or each task item, stack nicely on top of each other. So now we got to fix the task item itself because it's a big mess right now. So let's grab that, copy this, go down here, we'll say dot task item. And again, we're going to say display flex, align items center, justify content. We're going to say space between so that they go to the opposite ends of our task item. Okay. So we haven't given it like a width or anything yet, but it will. So let's give it a border so we can see it. Say border 1 pixel solid, and we'll say 333. There we go. And we'll give them padding of 1 rem all around. Okay, so you can see it's starting to take shape now. Say on desktop, the width of each input box is going to be 420 pixels, and the height will be 60 pixels. So I want them to be nice and big and readable. Just like that. See, now it's really taking shape. And then of course we'll make them rounded. We'll say border radius 8 pixels just to keep the design, uniform. Now let's take our task icons right here. This is the div that has both of our icons in it. We're going to add some styling to that to ensure that they're always side by side and nothing weird ever happens to them. So again, we're going to say display, flex, align item center, justify content, flex end. So that basically means with all that code we just did, you're not going to see a difference, but it says, hey, you always be side by side with flex and always be at the end. We don't ever want you bleeding over here. Okay. And then we'll say column gap to give them some padding on the sides of 0.5 rem, so about 80 pixels. Just separates them a little bit. And now let's go down here, and we got to style up the icon button class on our icon classes. Remember, they're nested inside a button. So we'll say dot icon button, and we're going to say border none, background none, because we're basically, even though these are nested in a button, so you can see the button right here, we're basically hiding that now. So background none, border none. We do want cursor to be pointer, and we'll say padding 0. So all those should hide the fact that these are on a button now. So if we refresh, now it just looks like they're icons, but remember, in the background, these are actually buttons. Now let's actually style up our buttons so that they're the correct colors that they should be. So to do that, we're going to go down here, we'll select each one. So we're going to select the first one, it's going to be icon button, and then we want to do the FA circle check. So it should be right here, FA circle check. Select that, say dot FA circle check. And for that, we're going to say color, and I want this to be like a green. I'm not going to make it the aquamarine color. I'm going to make it like an easier to read green. So it's going to be hashtag 3CB371, and we'll save and update. And now it's got that nice light green color, nice easy to read green. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll say dot icon btn. And then the next one is .fa-trash for our delete button. And for that, we're going to use a color. It's called like brick red. It's supposed to look like a brick. So it's hashtag B and then a bunch of 2s. 22222. Save. And just a nice, easy to read, soft red there. Okay. And then if we wanted to, we don't have to, but if we want to copy our list item down a couple times, and it'll kind of look more like the design, and then we can test out, you know, we could say this is a really long task. Make sure that everything stays aligned like it should, and it does. So we're good there. Now all we have to do is make our button to clear all. So, and it's just really easy. It's just this clear all task button, and that'll delete everything out of the database eventually. So let's go ahead and make that. So we're going to put our clear all button right below our task list, and we'll say button class of clear all -btn, and then the text is going to say clear all tasks. And then we're going to make this a type of button. All right, so let's see what we got here. There it is. So very simple. Let's just grab the clear all button class and style this up, and we'll be done. Most of the design here, we just got to make it mobile responsive after this, but that won't take long. So we'll say dot clear all button, and I'm going to give it a margin bottom of 3 rem, so there's always space, and on mobile devices it's not right on the bottom, just stuck to the bottom. I'm going to give this a width of 150 pixels and a height of 50 pixels. Font size is going to be 18 pixels. Font weight, I'm going to say bold. We want it to have the cursor pointer, and we're going to give it a background color of that same red as our delete buttons. I'm going to say border none. And color of the text in there will be white. So if we refresh, boom. Here we go. We got our clear all task button here. And if you wanted to, we could give it the border radius like everything else. I didn't do that in the original, but if we want it to remain nice and uniform, we'll do that. Why not? So there we go. We have our design now. Now we just got to make it mobile responsive. Just got to change a few things around, because you can see stuff gets a little scrunched up here on mobile. So let's right click and inspect. Get our mobile styles up here. This is our mobile area. If you have no idea how to use the Chrome developer tools, or if all this is new to you, I have a whole tutorial just on how to use the Chrome dev tools like a pro. This is what these are, the Chrome developer tools. So I'll go ahead and link that in the description for you if you want to check that out. It's like a 9 or 10 minute video. It teaches you a ton of stuff about how to use this. So we're going to have to make our media queries now. So let's go down here below our clear all button, and we'll say, make a comment, say media queries, And the first thing I'm going to do is show you guys here. I'm just going to see how this looks on other devices so I can determine what I want to do here. So the first thing I'll do, this looks good on iPad minis. This is like the smallest tablet, most popular tablet on the market, and that cuts off at 768 pixels. So I'm going to start my media queries at 767 to just make everything mobile from there down, which will cover all mobile phones and everything basically. So I'm going to say at media screen and I'll say max width 767 pixels, and then let's actually go to mobile phones because that's really what we're caring about right now. Yeah, so for that we don't need that much margin on the top on mobile phones, so for that I'll say main margin top just 1 rem, refresh, and all we're going to do now is just clean stuff up a little bit here. That's all we have to really do. Next we got to grab our to-do tracker. So let's see, I'm just going to copy this code down and we'll change what we need to. So let's say width instead of 500 pixels we'll put 100%. Save. There we go. And then that's going to scrunch everything up here a little bit, but we can fix that. So what we can do, we're going to keep everything flexed. So column gap, let's just say 1 rem. And then we'll keep all of this. Border radius, that's going to stay. Margin 0 auto is fine. Let's add padding all around. Say padding 1 rem all around to see if we can give everything some breathing room off the sides. That's better. Let's change height to auto. Yeah, that's better. And then let's just center that text there. And we could make the H2 a little bit smaller. Don't have to though. Let's grab our to-do subheading. Or what is it? Completed subheading. Just grab this, paste it down here. And all I want to do here is change this to text align center. Save. Boom. That looks better now. It's all centered. And then the next thing that we're going to want to do is change the width of our list items because that's definitely breaking our design. So let's grab that here. And we called those our task items, I believe. Well, actually, let's do that for our task input as well because we don't want that to break on smaller screens. So let's grab task input first because it's 350 pixels wide and there is smartphones out there that are smaller than that. Let's change the width to 100%. Save and update. And that's for this up here. Everything else will keep like that. All right, now let's grab our task item right here. This is like the last thing that's really breaking the design. And everything's going to pretty much stay the same but the width. So let's just delete all of this stuff and change what we need to. So let's say width 100%. There we go. Now they all fit in there nice. All right, let's see how this looks on devices now. That should be all we need to do for mobile styling. Let's check pixel. Looks good. Let's do 678 plus. Looking good. Let's do iPhone 10. Okay. Yeah, I think we're looking good. S9, this is a really small screen. So this looks a little wacky on small screens. Galaxy S9 Plus, but let's see, iPhone 5. Yeah, it looks a little wacky. So we could change that, I guess. So where does it start looking a little wacky? Maybe like 340 and below we should change stuff. So let's make a media query for that, just to cover our bases here. This will be for 340 pixels and below. And we'll have to make everything smaller in here. That'll fix a lot of our issues. So let's go up here, grab the to-do tracker, the H1 and the heading, and the task counter, and the spacer, everything. We're going to grab everything and modify it to what we want here. So the tracker itself should actually be okay. Let's do column gap 0.5 rem. It's the only change I want to make there, I think. And then, actually no, we'll leave everything as it is. I think I made it 1 rem. This needs to go down to like 30 pixels at least. Make this smaller. There we go. That fixes a lot of issues. That might be really what we need to do, just make that smaller. Let's see. Yeah, that made it look a lot better. Just changing that font heading size. We'll leave that. We'll make this down to 30 as well. Make it a little bit smaller. Keep everything else the same though. Keep this. Maybe we can just do like 3 pixels of spacer. There we go. That's fine. That looks fine. We'll just keep it like that on those super small screens. Everything else looks great. And I'm happy with that. Let's go back to this S8. S9 Plus. Yeah, it looks a lot better. So there we go. We even included our smaller screens. Yeah, I think we're good to go here. So can also do this test on it. Start big. Desktop. All the way down to mobile. Looks good. All right, guys. So that's our front end completed here. And the next steps, we're going to go ahead and set up a database and connect our database to our app, and then we'll get cracking on writing our PHP and JavaScript. All right, guys, so we got the front end of our app here. It's looking really good. Now let's go ahead and create our databases for this and connect our database to our app here, because without that, we won't be able to save everything and make everything dynamic. So I'm going to make this big here. Remember, I still have MAMP open. So my PHP server is still started, so that's why we're able to do all this, right? So anyway, let's go back here. We're on localhost in our app. I'm going to open up a new tab and say localhost and go to PHP. So localhost, my port 8888, and then I'm going to hit /PHPMyAdmin. And this is also part of MAMP or XAMPP if you have that downloaded. And this basically just gives you a UI, user interface, to create databases, delete them, create tables, and all of that. So this is like basically the SQL or database part of the software that we can use. So what we'll do here is we're going to go to new, and we're going to create a new database. So here we're going to give our database a name. So I'm going to call my database full stack to do app. And then we got to use underscores. You can't use dashes, so use underscores if you're going to name it like me, or if you're going to have multiple words in your database name, go ahead and use underscores. Now from our drop down here, this drop down basically asks, hey, like what kinds of characters or symbols do you want to accept to be stored in your database? What kind of languages, stuff like that. So as you can see here, if we go up like Romanian, Slovak, Slovenian, Spanish, all kinds of stuff that we can select in here. So the one that I usually select, this is the default that I have right now. For my databases, I usually go down to UTF-8MB4 _ general _ CI. And what that does is it accepts the widest ranges of languages and symbols and stuff, including emojis if people use emojis, which is pretty common nowadays. This code here for symbols that your database will accept is pretty much like one of the best, or the best that you can use for any database, because then pretty much everything will be accepted. So that's one that we're going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and use that one and hit create. All right. And then we should, over here in your left hand corner, you should be able to see it now. So full stack to do app, this is our database. So we have a database now, and we're selected. Make sure up here that you're in that database. It should say the database that you're currently in, full stack to do app. Now we have to create a table, because there's no tables, and tables are what actually stores the data within the database. So let's click here on our SQL. And now we're going to write some what's called SQL queries to go ahead and create the table for our database. So if you've never done this before, you're just going to see some basic queries in here. And I'll explain what everything is doing here. But this is basically how you write SQL. And SQL is its own little language as well. But it's pretty readable. It's pretty understandable. So in all caps, I'm going to write out create table if not exists And then we're going to hit space. I'm going to get out of caps lock, and I'm going to make 2 tildes. So a tilde is it's a symbol that's above your tab here next to your number 1. I'm going to make 2 of those. Those are tildes. I'm going to go in between them. And now you're going to put your actual table name. So I'm just going to name it to-dos. Or actually, I'll name it tasks. So my table name within our full stack to-do app is now going to be called tasks. And then I'm going to put parentheses, opening and closing. And now we're going to write the rest of our commands here in these parentheses. So again, just to reiterate, all we did here is say create a table if not exists. So create table as long as one doesn't exist for this database and call it tasks. And now we're going to create different rows in our table that are going to store different data, okay? So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to make 2 more tildes, and this is going to be a row called ID. And it's going to accept an integer, int. Integer means numbers, so we're going to give every task that we have a number, a numbered ID, so that we can tell them apart. And then we're going to write out unsigned, not null, and auto increment. And then we're going to put a comma. So again, we're going to have a row where each task gets its own numerical ID, and it's going to auto increment, okay? So that means that like automatically as we create tasks, the first one will have an ID of 1, the second one will have an ID of 2, the third one an ID of 3. It's going to automatically count up an increment and so on and so forth. So when we create our 500th task that the app's ever had, it'll be task 500 automatically. Next, we're going to store the next piece of data, and we're going to call it the title. And the title is basically going to be like what the user inputted from the input for the task. And that's going to be characters. So to get like variable characters, varchar, we say varchar 255. And what that basically means is we're going to accept strings of characters. Everything's going to be a string that they put inside of the input here. And then we're going to cap it at 255 characters as the maximum we're going to store per task. Nobody should have a task that's 255 characters or longer anyway, but you always cap it off when you're making a database. So we'll say varchar 255. And then again, we're going to put that not null into here. And every time you say, so null is the same thing that it means in programming, which means no value, nothing's there. And when we say not null, we're just basically making sure that SQL knows that there has to be a value in here. We can't create a non-null piece of data that doesn't exist. All right, so we're going to put another comma. And then next, we're going to, again, make a couple of tildes. And we'll name the next row is_done. And this is going to help us track what we've completed. So what's done, and that's going to be when we're clicking our check mark, where it's going to cross each one out. And then it'll update the counter so we can count how many tasks that we have done out of what we have here. To update all that with PHP, we have to, again, put another row in the database. So we have is done. And then we're going to write out something called tiny int. And we're going to put parentheses and a 1. And I'll explain this in just a second. And again, we're going to do not null. And then we're going to say default 0. So our is done, again, this is going to track if somebody's crossed out a task and updated this as a task complete. And what this tiny int means, so in programming, 1 is kind of representative of true and 0 false. So what this row is going to help us determine is if that person's completed the task or not. And the default is going to be 0, so not done yet. And then if we update our form, it's going to turn to 1 on the back end for the computer, which is going to tell the computer that this task has been completed. And then when we know if it has been completed, we'll do what we have to do, which in our case is going to be crossing out a task and updating it up here on our little tracker counter. Next, we're going to create a created at little timestamp row so that we know when each task was created, and this will help us organize them by like the oldest to newest task that was created, basically. So we'll put tilde created underscore at will be the name of the row. And then we'll say timestamp, all one word. Again, we'll use not null. It can't be empty. Say default. And then we'll put current timestamp. Whoops. just going to select current timestamp. So that means like whenever it's created right now, basically coded as created right now. And then we're going to put another piece of code on here, or query. It says primary key. And our primary key that we're going to use to tell everything apart first is going to be each task, because it's going to have a different ID. And now we're going to go down here. We're not going to put a comma here. Don't put a comma there. It's going to break it if you do. Go down here. We're going to go to our closing parenthesis, and then we're going to enter in one more little piece of code here. We're going to say engine equals no DB default. I'll explain this in a second. And then we're going to say char set equals UTF-8 MB4. Now we're going to say collate equals UTF-8 MB4 underscore general underscore CI, and you should recognize that because this is the stuff that we selected when we created the database. So all this is saying is on the back end, use InnoDB to store everything, which is just the most modern, secure way to do it. And then we're going to accept the character set UTF-8 MB4, and then the general CI one, which accepts, like I said, it accepts the most symbols, it accepts emojis. It is case sensitive, so like usernames and all that will be case sensitive. It's just the best way to store data modern, basically. So we're just going to put that in our table as well to make sure everything matches our actual database so that we don't get any errors. All right, so after we enter all of that in, we're going to click go. All right, so we got a green check mark, so it means that we didn't have any errors and we're good to go here. So if we click into our full stack to do app over here, we'll see our table right here, tasks. Click into our table, and now we have ID, title, is it done, and when was it created. So of course it's empty now because we haven't put anything in there yet, but we will with our app here in just a second. All right, so now we're going to go in there. We're actually going to connect our app to our database, and we have to do that now in our actual PHP. So we'll do that now. So let's make this big for now, and we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it db.php for database, db for database. And we're going to open up some PHP tags here. And now basically what we have to do is set up parameters and use some built-in functions for connecting our database. Pass our data into there for like our username for the database and password and all that, which I'll tell you what it is now by default. And then we can connect to it. So let's get that done here. So now we're going to use some built-in function called define that accepts a key, or a name and a key basically, or a name and a value I should say, to actually connect our database and define what it is and all that. So we're going to literally write out the word define, parentheses, and then we're going to put our first name in here, which we're going to call db underscore host, and then we're going to do a comma, and then typically, so then you'll put parentheses and you'll put your value in here. Typically it's just localhost is what we're going to put in because that's what we're making right now. Or that's what we're on. We're just on localhost building this app. So you should just be able to put localhost in there. If you have an issue or throw something, you can look up if you're using XAMPP or some other software. You're gonna have to Google or ask AI to look up, like give it your code and say, hey, like what should I put in my DB host area? Here's what I'm using, and it should help you correct that. But usually it's localhost. Next, we're gonna say define, and we're gonna type DB underscore user. And for both MAMP and XAMPP, your username, this is basically the username for the database. It's usually root by default, so unless you've changed it, which we didn't do that ourselves anywhere, so it should still be root for you too. Put in root. If you have a different username for your PHPMyAdmin databases, then put in whatever you have there. Next, we're going to do define, and we're going to say DB pass for password. And my fault, we're going to do single quotes. And for MAMP, it's usually root. I'll make a comment here. If you downloaded XAMPP, if you're on Windows and you're using XAMPP, your password by default is usually just going to be an empty string like that. So if you're on XAMPP, it'll just be this. So that I can help you fix if you get an error with. And then lastly, we're going to put the actual name of the database we want to connect to in here. So we're going to say define, say DB underscore name. And I forgot my quotes, my single quotes here. And then we're going to put in the name that we named our database. So we named it full stack, I think to do app, right? Double check. Full stack to do app. And notice how I'm putting semicolon after everything. You have to do that in PHP, guys. This isn't like JavaScript where you can take it or leave it. You have to do that, else you're going to get an error and your code's not going to work. So always put a semicolon at the end of each block of code that you wrote. And now what we're going to do, now that we have all of these defined, is we're going to pass them in using the MySQL connect function. We're going to pass all that information in that we made up here to our actual database connection to connect it from our PHP to our SQL database. Like this is actually what's going to connect it now. So we're going to say and this is just, this is how you make variables in PHP. They start with a $sign, they all do. So this is just our variable name. We're going to say MySQL equals, and now we're going to use the built-in function, MySQL underscore connect. Okay, so this is built in. And then we're just going to pass in all of the values that here, not just the names, I should say, not the values. So we're going to pass DB host, and we're going to separate them by commas. And we'll do DB user, DB pass for password, and DB name. And then we're going to do an if statement down here to test if we're actually connected. So we're going to say if, and then we're going to use the not operator. Remember, exclamation in programming means not, so is not. So if our MySQL is not working or not connected, then we're going to say die, and then we're going to say database connection failed, and then we're going to have a space, then we're going to concatenate. The dot is how you concatenate stuff. So in JavaScript, you probably learned that it's the plus symbol. In PHP, it's a dot. And then we're going to say, show us the error. So we're going to say MySQL underscore connect underscore error. Just like that. And so that'll show us an error, basically. This is just like a built-in error message right here. So we're saying, if our MySQL database connection failed, die, kill the connection is what that die means. Like cut the connection, and then give the user the following custom message: database connection failed, and then give them the official error message built into PHP. Or we can do an else just to see if it's connected. And if it's connected, we can just say echo database has been connected. I forgot the O there. So echo is just how you basically echo or print text to a web page. And then lastly but not least, one more time we can remind our database to use the UTF code that we're using. So we're going to say MySQL underscore set underscore charset, and then we'll pass in our MySQL variable, and we're going to say, hey, please make sure you're going to be using UTF 8 MB4 so we don't get any kind of weird errors or bugs or anything like that if people decide to use emojis or weird symbols when they're writing their tasks out. So we can go back to our page now and refresh to see if we're connected, but nothing's going to work yet because now we have our index.php has no idea that this file exists, so we have to basically pass the data over from this file to our index page. So I'll show you how to do that now. So let's go to the very top of our index.php. And now let's actually switch to PHP mode on this page because we've been in HTML for a while. We're going to go write PHP now, so we're going to select PHP from our language selector here. And now we're back in PHP mode. And we'll go to the top of our HTML page, so completely outside of our HTML, and now we're going to write some PHP up here. So we're going to do an opening PHP tag, closing PHP tag, and we're going to do the following code. We're going to say require, and then we're going to do double underscore, and we're going to say dir for directory, double underscore, then a dot, And then we're going to pass in our file name, which is db.php. And I forgot my space here. Okay. So what this does is say, hey, this little piece of code is dirs for directory, and it says require your DB PHP on this file. And so what that basically means in English is all of the data from this file, include that in this file now. So that's all we have to do. Now these are basically hooked up and connected. And then we also want to put a slash in here, my fault, so that it connects properly. All right, so we added our slash in here, we refreshed the page, and then we are getting a good message here. Database has been connected, so we are good to go. So I want this to, and normally like when you're running like a real web app, you don't want to keep this here. Like once you know the database is connected, you can just delete this else, and then we'll leave the connection failed in case something happens. Like we do want to get a message that it's not working, but you don't always want to open up a web app and say that the connection's working, like especially as the user. You'd be like, what the hell does that mean, right? So just make sure you delete that, but at least we know that our database and our table and everything is all connected. So now we can start building out some PHP functionality here. All right, so our database is connected, guys. It's time to start writing some more PHP in here. It's time to make this page dynamic. So we're going to stay at the top of our opening PHP tags here, and we have to write one more chunk of PHP code up here that will basically allow us to fetch the tasks from the database every time the page is reloaded and fill all of our tasks lists in and all of that stuff. So we need to do that at the top of the page because that's what needs to be executed every time the form is basically submitted. So if you don't know a lot about PHP, guys, and how we're going to be building this app, I'm going to be building it like as classic bare bones PHP as I can. And that means that we're just going to be using PHP to basically change the state of the page. When people say change the state in programming and web development, that means change how the page looks and what's going on. That's called the state. So we're changing state. If this was just JavaScript, we'd be changing the state by using events and clicks and stuff like that and local storage. But since we're using a PHP with database and we're rendering everything with the server, the only way that we can change the state of the page and how things look and keep track of stuff is by basically submitting forms over and over again. So we're going to be wrapping all of our list items and our UL, our tasks. We're going to be creating multiple little forms that when we click buttons, it basically submits a form, which is how we submit information to the backend and the database to update the page. So to do all that and get all of the tasks written out and have everything like accurately displayed, we have to fetch basically the data from the database, the tasks and what's going on every time we submit a form, so that the page refreshes the state and looks how it should look basically. So hopefully that was easy to understand. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to run some SQL queries and basically have everything preloaded up here so that when we start actually adding list items, that they'll be stored in the database and they'll be rendered on the screen. So, and again, this might be a whole new world to you. This might be kind of difficult to understand, but that's okay. I'm going to do this as slow and as easy as we can, and I'm going to make plenty of comments in the code here so you know exactly what's going on. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to run a query, all tasks from the database, and we're going to get them newest first. And remember, when we created our database table, if we look at our table here, created at, we have like a timestamp on everyone, and that's how we're going to know what's created first, basically, and that's why we created that. Remember, our IDs, every task that we ever create is going to get a unique ID starting from 1 and counting up 1. And then they're all going to have the title, which is what the user actually adds in there, and then we're going to check if it's done or not. And remember, is it done by, did they click the check and cross it out or not? Okay? So hopefully everything is now going to start making a lot more sense as we get into this. So we're going to start by creating a variable, and I'm going to call it task result set. And you'll notice that when I do PHP, guys, I separate words in my variables by using underscores. That's a very common way to write variables. People also use camel case like in JavaScript. So if we were doing this in JavaScript, we would say like const task result set. That would be camel case. And you can use that same naming convention in PHP. But I like to keep my PHP and JavaScript like completely separate in the way that I write them, just so I don't get confused. So this is how I do by PHP. I think this is called Pascal case, and that's where you put underscores in between words and you keep everything lowercase. So anyway, this variable is going to equal MySQLi underscore query, which is a built-in function that we're going to be using right here. And then we're going to use our MySQLi variable, which we used in our db.php to store our connection. Okay, so that's where that's coming from. And then we're going to put a comma. And then we're going to write some SQL in here in our PHP to tell it what we want. So we want to select the ID row, the title, basically everything that we put is done from, and we want to select, so basically those 3 rows from our table. So we named our table tasks. So we'll say from tasks, and we'll say order by ID in descending order, so that they show up in the order that they're created, basically. We're going to put, in our closing parenthesis, we're going to put a semicolon to close it out. And now we're going to go down here, and let's make this big. Sorry guys, probably easier if you can see the whole screen here. So we're running a query to our database to get all the tasks, basically all the information from the rows that we need. And then we're going to store all of the rows of data in a PHP array so that we can easily use it later on when we make our whole page dynamic. So I'm going to say store all rows of data in a PHP array for later use. And I'm going to say task underscore rows variable is going to equal an empty array for now. Okay, so we just created an empty array named task underscore rows. And now we're going to use a while loop to loop through everything. So we're going to say while, and we're going to say task underscore row, not rows, but row, task underscore row is equal to MySQLi underscore fetch underscore assoc. And then we're going to pass in our task result set variable that we set up here, which queries our database. Then we're going to do some curly braces. And then now I'm going to put a comment here. We're going to say convert is done, which is one of our rows of data that's going to track if they're done or not. Convert is done to integer, either a 1 or a 0, so we know if it's true or false. And then we'll put that in here, 0 or 1 instead of a 0 in a string or a 1 in a string. Okay, so we're converting it from a string to an actual number here. So convert is done to an integer 0 and 1 instead of a 0, 1 in a string, varchar, like in our database. We're going to go down here and we're going to say task row is now going to be equal to, so we're going to update our array now. We're going to look for is done, and that's now going to equal int, oops, for integer, task row, and then we're going to say is done. Oops, don't want an equal sign here. We want it right there. There we go. And then down here, we're going to say task rows array is now going to be equal to the integer task row. So task underscore row. So one more time, guys, just to go over this, we're storing all the rows of data in a PHP array. So we have a task rows array, and then we're saying while task row, and then we're saying equals MySQLi fetch assoc. So that's a built-in function that takes all of the data that's returned from this query, basically all the rows of data, and it turns our data into an associative array. That's basically all that that's doing there, and it's doing it with just this built-in function. And then all you have to do is pass in whatever you want to turn into that inside the parentheses, okay? And then we're converting is done to an integer instead of like a string 0 or 1, so that we can actually determine if the stuff is done or not. 0 is not done, 1 is done. Okay, 0 false, 1 is true. That's like a law for all of computing. It's just a bunch of zeros and ones. And then we're spitting it out at the end as an associative array. So on the back end, I can show you this here, that AI made me, ChatGPT made for me. I can show this to you. So on the back end, and this is what AI is really good for, guys. If there's code that I'm doing in here that you're coding along with me, open up ChatGPT, just sign up. Even if you're just using the free version, you can paste code in here and just be like, hey, what does this mean? Explain it to me in better detail. And it'll break everything down. AI is very good at explaining what code does. It's very, very good at that. So on the back end, what that code does is it's changing all of our rows of data into associative arrays like this. So ID1, title, take out trash, is done. If it's 0, it's not done yet. ID2, do homework, is done. So this was it's just changing it to this kind of data in the back end. That's what our code is doing right there, so that it can make decisions for us in our code later on when we make the page dynamic. Next, we're going to go down here. We're almost done with this chunk of code, and we need to put some functionality in here so that we can count and track our total tasks done up here. So let's put in a comment, and we'll say count totals for the tracker, or for the, let's see, what do we call it? The to-do tracker? Yeah. Count totals for the to-do tracker. So we're going to create a variable, and it's going to be called total task count. And that's going to be equal to count. And we're going to wrap that, and we're going to put task rows in here. Don't forget your semicolon. And this count is just a built-in function that literally does what it says. It's just going to count how many tasks are in the associative array that we just created. And remember, we're getting that information for our array from our actual database. That's what count does, okay? So it's basically saying count all the tasks that are in there, and it's going to be the total task count. Now we're going to set another variable, and I'm going to call it completed task count. And by default, that's just going to be set to 0, because by default, nothing's going to be completed. And let me see, we got a little typo here. Completed. There we go. And then we're going to use a for each loop to basically loop through every time we submit the form or change the state of the page. This for each loop is going to run, and it's going to check if anything else was crossed off or not, and then update the counter and the page accordingly. So we're going to say for each, and then we're going to say task rows as task, and then we're going to say if task, and we're going to put brackets, and we're going to say we're going to pass in is done is equal to 1, or if a task is completed, do the following. We're going to say add 1 to the completed task count. So we're going to say completed task count. And to add 1, we can just say plus plus, which means increment up 1. And so this code is eventually going to be reflected in this thing right here. That's what we just built. We just built functionality for us to actually keep track of what's going on down here and then update this accordingly. Now we still have to put in another piece of code to do that, to make this live up here. And we'll do that in just a second, but just know that that's what that piece of code did. Alright guys, so that's all the code that we're going to do in here for now. This is just some logic that we have to set up. Let's actually start putting in the logic to make this thing live, so that all that we just did for this, we're going to make that dynamic, and then we're going to start setting up the add task functionality, so that when we can actually type stuff in here, hit the add button, and actually add a real task down here, and then we'll be deleting these static tasks. Alright guys, so now we're going to go ahead and make our little number tracker dynamic by replacing some of the hard-coded stuff in the element here with some PHP. So let's make this big so we can see it really easily. And we're going to go down here and in our div that has task counter on it, and then it has our number and our spacer in there. And we're going to replace the hard-coded 1 and 3 with some PHP. Let's delete the 1 first. And we're going to have an opening PHP tag and a closing PHP tag. And then we're going to say echo. And remember, echo is how we print stuff onto the page, basically, with PHP. So we're going to say echo, and then we're going to say, use our variable completed task count, so that it shows what the actual completed task count is up here from the logic that we just made. because so that'll be the completed task count, and then our second one, we're going to erase this 3. And again, we're going to go PHP opening and closing tags. And then over here, we're going to echo out total task count, right? So that would make sense, right? So we have completed out of total, right? So hopefully that makes sense. And again, we're getting those variables and that logic from what we just made up here. Completed task count, total task count. We used a loop. That's what this code is doing. Now we have to update our form so that we can actually make it so that when somebody types a task in here and hits add, it'll submit and actually add it to our task list. So let's go do that now. So we got to go to our form here, our task form. And we're going to put an action on here now. And an action, what action does is it tells the form where to submit its data. And I want to submit this data to a new file that we're about to create, and we're going to call it add.php for like add a task. And then we can even make the file now. So let's go into our files, make a new file, call it add.php. And add.php is just going to be a bunch of PHP logic that we kind of like we just wrote up here. This is just going to be a logic page where we submit the information to. So it's not going to be anything that people see on the front end, but we'll do that in just a second. So let's just leave that there. Let's close everything else for now because we have to add a few more things to our form to make add work. So after add, I'm going to add what method that we'd like to use. And you can either, when you're passing data, you can use one of two methods. You can use post, or you can use another method called get. Okay? So we're not going to get too into the weeds on that. If you want all the details, guys, check out my complete web developer course. But just really briefly, if we use get, we're going to pass data up here in the address bar of your web browser. And that's fine unless you're going to send data that you want to be secure. You wouldn't want it to be visible here, like usernames and password. So instead of get, if you use post, a post request, it'll be sent behind the scenes and the data won't be showed up here. Basically, that's what it is. Now, we could use get for this app because there's nothing sensitive here, but to teach best practices, we're going to use the post method so that nothing is visible up here. Okay, so that's just about as simple of an explanation as I can give between get and post method. And again, whenever you've done HTML in the past, you might have seen action and method before. Maybe you've just did some JavaScript projects where a form is involved, and you never really knew what they did, what action and method were. Maybe they just auto-populated and you always deleted them. Well, that's what they do. So now you know that, right? It's pretty cool. So one more thing that we have to do is we have to go to our text input where the user is going to input their task. And we have to give it the name attribute because the name attribute is what we're going to use to, it's kind of like a variable. So that the form that the code that we're going to add in add.php, it's going to look, we're going to tell it to look for the input that has a name of, we'll call it task title. And what we just did there, it's kind of like when you put an ID or a class name on your HTML and then grab it with JavaScript and store it in a variable. In PHP, your way of doing that is by using the name attribute. That's kind of like a class or an ID for PHP. And then selecting it with PHP when you make a logic page. So that's kind of what name is doing there. It's PHP's event handler, kind of, like, if you want to think of it like that, if you know JavaScript. So now we're going to create our add file, and I want to make sure that the database can communicate with our add file. So I'm going to copy this require dir db.php, and I'm going to go over to my add.php, and I'm going to actually paste that in here. So let's make some PHP tags, make our opening and closing tag, and then we'll paste that up here first, and then you can even make a comment just to remind yourself. See, connect to the database. That's what this is doing. And next we're going to write some code that will allow us to, we'll say, get the text from the form input, and we'll put the trim method on it. And if you know what the trim method is, if you know JavaScript, trim just eliminates white space so that if somebody does this and then types something and then does that, it'll ignore the white space and submit it, anyway and make it look good. So we're going to add that method onto our input as well. So we're going to create a variable, and we're going to call it new underscore task underscore title. And that's going to be equal to trim. We're going to wrap everything in the trim method, and that's basically identical. It's the same thing that we do in JavaScript. And we're going to use the post method. So we're going to use a super global variable is what this is called. And we're going to do that for the post. And what this does is it's basically an array that we can put values in. And we're going to pass in the name in quotes. We're going to pass in the name of that input field so that we're telling it to use the post method to send data from the input. So let's go grab that. Let's copy and paste it just so we can avoid typos. So right here, our name, we want our name task title to be passed in there into our post super global. And again, this is just a variable. It's basically an array that we can pass the values into of what you want to hook onto to use the post method with. And then we're going to add a little bit more logic into this to make it a little bit more robust. We're going to use 2 question marks. That's called the null coalescing operator. And then we're going to use an empty string. Okay? So now what that did is, what this variable stands for now is it says, take whatever the user typed into the input field, use the trim method on it to ignore white spaces if there's white space, send the data in the background via post so it's secure, whatever the task is. Don't send it up here, send it in the background so people can't see what it is. And then, or, this is kind of like a mini if-else statement, and we're basically saying, and if people don't add anything into the input and they just click this, it means that it's empty. It's just an empty string. There's nothing in there. So that's kind of what that means. It just adds like a little bit more robustness to here so that PHP knows if something is empty and then maybe what to do if it is empty, which we can tell it to do stuff. I mean, what it's going to do right now, how we'll probably just leave it, is you're going to get that HTML form validation that says, please fill out this field, right? So nothing too special that is going to happen there, but it's always good to put that in. So let's move on now. And we're going to use an if statement because we only want to submit data. We don't want to be the user to be able to click this button, even though they won't be able to right now because we have, like I said, that form validation on there with HTML. But we want to ensure that if they just try to add an empty task, it won't actually create one here. So for that, we're going to use an if statement. So let's make a comment again, and we'll say only insert task if the input is not empty. So then we're going to say if, and we'll say new task title, which is, again, remember, it's this up here. So new task title is basically whatever they type in here minus the white space. And we're going to say if new task title input field is not equal to empty. So basically, if there is something in the input, do the following. We're going to do something called, the first thing that we want it to do is something called escaping the text to make it safe for SQL so people can't do injection into our database. So we're going to make it, and I'll explain that in more detail in just a second. So we're going to make a variable called escaped underscore title, and that's going to equal MySQL underscore real underscore escape string, and then parentheses, and then we're going to pass in our connection, our MySQL, and then we're going to also pass in next our new task title. So again, this whole built-in little function here, and that we're saving to this variable, is just making it so nobody can type in malicious code that can infect our database, which people, nowadays it's usually bots that hack into stuff like that, but this is just like an added security measure. So we'll put a comment here, and we'll say escape the text to make it safe for SQL. And then we also, after we do that security measure, we actually want to insert the new task into the database. So again, this is just going to basically, like I said, this is all behind the scenes code. So we'll test this out, but after we write this code, nothing's going to appear here yet, but we'll check our database and see if it gets sent to the database, our new task. So we're going to use another built-in function for that. We're going to go below here and say MySQL underscore query. And then we're going to pass in MySQL. Remember this MySQL, guys, that we keep passing in everywhere. If we go to our database.php, that's what we named our variable that's basically connecting everything. So this is like our database connection, basically, in case you forgot. So we're going to go connect to MySQL, and then we're going to do the following. We're going to write a little SQL query here. We're going to say insert, and insert is that keyword that you're always going to use when you want to put something into the database. So we're going to say insert into. We want to insert it into our table, so let's go grab our table name again. So I'm going to say localhost, localhost / PHPMyAdmin. Got our full stack to do app here. And then our table name is tasks, right? Yeah, tasks. I keep forgetting our table name, sorry. Insert into tasks. And then we want to insert the insert it into the title row, because that's where the actual task is going to be. And then we'll say values, and then we're going to pass in the security measure that we just wrote out. So we're going to use parentheses, single quotes, and we're going to pass in that variable that we made, escaped title. So we're basically saying, and run that security little code that we just wrote on top of that, please. And then after everything is submitted back into the database, because basically we're submitting a form, right? That's what PHP's, that's what we're going to be doing. Instead of event listeners, we're going to resubmit a form and refresh the page every time we do something. So then we want to redirect it back to index.php. So basically you load a fresh version of the page after we submit a new task. So I'll put a comment here that says redirect back to index.php. So the new task shows. And then we're going to say header. This is how you redirect to a new page. We're going to basically tell the page where to go. We're going to say header, single quotes, location with a capital L, and then you basically give the address that you want it to go to and open the bar here. And we want it to go back to the home page, which is just we'll just put index.php for now. And then remember, got to finish that off with the semicolon. And then you want to use the keyword of exit, which basically means stop executing the script so that nothing bad can happen. We don't leave any backdoors open so people can get into our app. That's a simple explanation for that. You always got to use exit after header. It's best practice. All right, so we can test this out now and see if, remember, nothing's going to render on screen yet, but we can at least see if this ends up in the database. So let's go here, and let's say this is a dynamic task. Submit. And remember, nothing's going to show here because we have to still add our code to add it dynamically. We can see if it's in the database, though. Let's refresh our database page. Refresh the page. I had to do Shift Command R, or you can do CTRL Control Shift R to hard refresh your page before my task would show up. But there it is. This is a dynamic task. It is now in our database. So that is working. We can try another one here. We can just say workout. That would be like a normal to do, right? So workout, submit the form, go back here, refresh our database page. There it is, workout. And see how they're getting IDs? We're doing auto increment with IDs. So this is the ID of 1, workout is an ID of 2. Okay? And now look, 0 out of 2. Our dynamic tracker is also working too. Now, remember, it's reflecting right now what's in the database. So even though there's 3 here, this is just reading the database right now and how many tasks I have. And it's like, oh, he has 2 tasks. If we do one more, so we can say another task, submit, and now look, it went up to 3. And then if we go to our database, refresh, there it is. All right. So that's cool. We've got, we're pretty much halfway or more than halfway done with the app now. The next thing we'll do, guys, is we have to go into our actual task list and we'll delete all of our hard-coded tasks. And then we're going to add some PHP in here to make all of our tasks show up dynamically instead of just going to the database. All right, guys, so our database is working. It's storing tasks, and our counter is reflecting how many tasks are in our database. So it says 4. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 that I've added here through our little submitting our form. So now we have to take out these static list items because remember, this is really just to show off what the design is going to look like. We're going to take these out of here and we're going to go inside of our list and we're going to add PHP and make everything dynamic now so that our tasks show up from the database down here as list items. And of course, we're going to keep all of our classes and everything so that everything still remains styled correctly, but we're going to add some PHP to make it dynamic. So we're going to go right below our unordered list item, our UL for our task list right here. So go below our unordered list. And we're going to drop into PHP, and we're going to make a little if statement. We're going to say PHP opening, PHP closing. And then in our PHP tags, we're going to say if and we'll say empty. And so we're going to say empty and then do parentheses. So empty is like a built-in PHP function that goes in and sees if like an input is empty. And if so, it'll do something that we tell it to in this if statement. So we'll wrap it in empty. And then we'll use our task rows variable that we've created earlier. So we're going to say if task rows is empty. And then what we're going to do is a colon here, which basically is the same as curly braces. It's kind of like a shortcut for the if else statement. And then we're going to go below here. And we can echo out a message that says like no tasks yet, add a task or something like that. So what we'll do is we'll put our li in here. Let's just copy this because we want it to have the same styling. So we'll put an li in here of task item, and then we'll put a closing li. And then in between there, we'll have our, what do we have? li text is our div. So let's just copy this div here because we want our div to say li text. And then we'll just have a message if there's like, say that this app is fresh, there's no tasks added yet. We'll tell the user, add a task to get started. And then we'll go below it here. And now we have to do our else part of the statement. So we'll open up PHP again. We'll say else, again with the colon, and then close PHP. And then after the else statement, we're going to now write some code that's going to loop out every task that's currently in the database. And we're going to use a for each loop for that. So again, go below there, we're going to open up PHP again, and then we'll close it. And then in between there, we're going to say for each parentheses, and then we're going to say task rows as task, and then we're going to do that colon again. And remember, that colon is basically a shortcut for making curly braces, okay? And then below here, we're going to have our task item, our first li, which is fine. Just leave that there. And then we're going to go into li text, and we'll delete this take out the trash. And then actually, while we're at it, let's delete our other task items really quick, our hard-coded ones, because we don't need any of them in here, except we'll keep the first task item because we're going to be adding dynamic stuff to that to keep our styles. So this list item is going to go away, and this one's going to go away. We don't need these two here. Okay, so delete those to make it a little bit cleaner. Refresh. Okay, we're going to get an error now because we're in the middle of an if statement, so don't worry about that. That's going to fix itself. So let's keep going, though. So in our li text div after li text, so within the opening div still, remember closing div is here, so we'll start on the opening div. We're just going after the class. We're going to, again, drop into some PHP. And we actually want this to be a part of the, we want to drop the PHP in the class area because we're actually going to be dynamically adding classes and changing styles in here too. So actually go inside the class itself, inside the quote, and then make your closing PHP. And then in between here, we're going to put some code in here that's going to check if the task is done. And if it is done, we'll add another CSS class that we don't have yet, but basically in our design, when stuff is done, we're going to have the tasks crossed out and lighter text with our cross out button for that check button that we have. So we have to add that functionality now. So I'm going to show you how we do that with PHP. So we're going to say echo task, and then we're going to pass in is done, which is how we're tracking if something is crossed off and checked off or not. So we're going to say is done, or, but the single question mark basically means or. We'll put in single quotes and we'll say done. And then we're going to use a colon, and then we're going to say empty. And then our closing div is still down here. So let's go in between there and in the li text div itself. Now, so this is all just in the class. That's going to control our styles, and I'll explain this in more detail in just a second. But now we're in the li text div, and we're going to do some more code. We're going to say PHP echo, and we're going to echo out the task, and then we're going to put brackets, and we're going to grab the title, which is basically what the task is, what the person fills out, and that's going to be stored in our database as title is the actual task, right? So we're going to grab that, and then we're going to do a curly brace, and then we're going to close out that PHP. So really quick, let's go over this code because that might have gotten really confusing, and I'm going to connect it because we put code up here initially that's going to make this make more sense. So, and we have to make a CSS class really quick because this is actually a CSS class. So check this out. This code means, and let's make this big here. So we're in our task item now, and we opened up PHP code in our CSS class. Like our ending quote for the class is here. So there's PHP code in the class, and we said, hey, check to see if the task is done, meaning did they click the check mark? If they did, then this question mark here basically means, so it's saying if the task is done, and then this is like a shortcut for an if-else statement. This is called the ternary operator. So in other words, if they click on that check and we resubmit the form that it's done, add a class called done, which we're about to create. We haven't created that yet. Or treat it as empty, so it's not done yet, basically. And all of that logic that we just made there is what we did up here, where we said task row is done, change it to an integer so that we know it's done. Convert is done to an integer, 0 or a 1 instead of 0 or a 1. Remember, 0 in programming means false, 1 means true, and it's done. So we're taking off of this while loop and that logic, and now we're inserting some code dynamically into our HTML to actually act that out on the screen. So we're basically saying, and this is how we would do it with PHP. Remember with JavaScript, if you know JavaScript, we could just add a class name by saving this element to a variable, then saying .classlist.add, and then we would add the done class that way. This is how you do it in PHP. Okay? So we're basically saying, again, echo out the task, and if it's done, if somebody actually clicked it and resubmitted the form that it's done, add the done class. And then after we do all that, after we determine if the person's crossed this off yet, like a task out to signify that it's done yet, echo out the task as it should be, either done or not done. And remember, title is just what the actual task is and how it's saved in our database. So let's go make our class that's actually done. Our done class now, so you can see what's going to happen if a task is done. So let's go to our CSS really quick. We'll leave off right here with our PHP. Just really quick, let's go make this CSS class, and we're just going to call it done, basically. So let's see. We'll do it in our task list area, and we'll go make it. We'll make it right here. So we're going to say .li dash text dot done. Okay, and then the done class, if something's done, we're going to say text decoration, and we're going to use line through so that it gets crossed out, and then we're going to make the task a little faint so it looks like it's not usable. Basically, to do that, we're going to use opacity, and we'll say opacity 0.6, so it's kind of like grayed out and a line through it. So hopefully that makes more sense now of what this done means. That's the class that we just made now. Now that class is there, it'll actually do something. So now we're done with that first part for like our li text area. So that's going to actually put our task where our tasks should be dynamically. Now we're going to move on to the task icons area because we've got to make these dynamic now. So that when we click the delete button, it deletes something. When we click the check button, it crosses it out, which is the logic we just wrote up here for adding the class. So first thing that we'll do is we'll make our complete button, that circle and check mark, dynamic, and we should start probably adding some comments here. So let's start commenting our code, and let's do this together so that you know exactly what's going on. If you come back here and the code that it does, you can kind of reverse engineer some of this stuff and learn a lot more from it. So up here we'll say, you can make a comment and just say check if any tasks are there, or I'll say any tasks have been created. We're starting that with an if statement, and then we'll say up here, if no tasks, show them a message, and then we'll say down here, we'll go above here and we'll say this code up below is say add done class if check mark has been clicked. And now we're down at our task icons, and we're going to now add logic for check button to cross out completed tasks. So what we have to do, guys, to send the data over and actually change the page and move everything dynamically is we're going to wrap our buttons inside of forms, because remember what I said, PHP, the only way that it can work is by basically, at least at the bare bones level without using JavaScript and Ajax and all that, is you have to basically submit forms. That's how you're going to change the state of the page and send data to the database every time. So we have to wrap our buttons now in mini forms, because that's how PHP works on the back end, right? It submits data through forms. We can't use event listeners because we're not making JavaScript app. This is a PHP app. So check this out. We're going to say form, and we'll give it a class of inline form that we'll create here in just a second, a new CSS class. And this particular form is going to go to a file called toggle.php that we'll create here, and that's going to pass the data so that we'll know if we have something checked off or not as a task is done. So we'll make a toggle.php file a little bit later on after we do this part. And then we're going to use the method here. Remember our methods. We're going to send the data using the post method. So we'll put post in there. And then we'll take our closing form tag and cut that. And we're going to put it right below here, right below our button for our actual check mark. Oh, sorry, that's the trash can right here. So go below this button and save. So now and then we can indent these here. So now our circle check button is now wrapped in a form with the action of toggle.php, the post method, and a class of inline form. So really quick, let's go make that inline form class so that it doesn't mess up our styles. So let's say inline form, and what this does, what these styles are going to do is just make sure that our buttons stay side by side and our form doesn't get all out of whack now. So we'll just say display inline, say margin 0. All right, so that's done. So those are probably I think those are the only two CSS classes that we have to add, so we should be done with that part. And now on the next line above our button, our first button that says icon, we're going to make something called a hidden input that's going to help us pass some data in our form that the user's not going to see. So you might have never seen this before, but if we do input, we can say type hidden, so it doesn't show up on the screen. And this is a very common practice in PHP. You use hidden forms a lot sometimes. So we'll say hidden. Our name is going to be ID, and the value for the form, we're going to echo out the actual ID for the task in the database. So basically doing this is going to help. It's basically going to tell our database like which task it is by its ID. Remember, all of our tasks have IDs and they auto increment in our database, right? So this is going to help our form and our logic know like what task we're talking about when we do something. So we're going to do opening PHP, and then we'll do our closing PHP. And here we're going to say echo, and we're going to say task, and we're going to grab the ID. And then we can actually, let's move this comment right here, and then we'll make another comment here. We'll say toggle check button, because that's what this button is, just so you can clearly see like where we are, what we're doing. And now we're going to go below that hidden ID we just made to our button that has the class of icon btn, and we're going to change this to a type of submit, because it's going to be a submit button because we're submitting a form. And then we'll add another attribute here to it that you might not know what it is or never seen before, but it's going to be called title. And then on our title, we can just put something like toggle complete. So what that's going to do is if the user hovers over our icon button, a little message will pop up in the browser that tells them what it is. So it'll say toggle complete, or we can say, maybe in more plain English, we can say check, or we can just say, task completed, something like that. And I'll show you that. We'll demonstrate all that when we're done with the app. So I'll show you what that is. And that's all we really have to do to make all of this dynamic. So we're still going to have an error, so we can't really go check it yet because we're in the middle of our code. We're going to throw an error now because we haven't ended our whole if statement and everything yet. We're still in it. So just be patient. We need to go down now to the next icon button and basically do the same thing that we just did. So we have to do a form. And this time we're going to have a different action because this is for our delete button. So let's go here, say delete button. And now we have our form. And our form is going to go to another file that we'll make in the future called delete.php. And then again, we're going to use the method to send the data as post. And then we're going to add a class again, that same class. We're going to call it inline form. And then we're going to cut our closing form tag and paste it down below the button again. There. And then same thing, we're going to go into the button, into our delete button, the button that's it's nested in. We're going to change this to a type of submit. And then we can again give it a title so that the user gets a little prompt on what it's going to do. And we'll just say delete task is what will pop up. And then don't forget, underneath our form here, we actually need to make our hidden input again. So let's just copy this one that we have up here. Put it right here. And it's going to be all the same information in there. We're just basically going to get the task ID from the database so that if we delete the button, instead of just toggle it as crossed out or completed, the database will know which task to delete based off of its ID that all of our tasks get automatically. All right, so that's all we have to do to make everything dynamic. So let's go down now. We have to go down to below our LI here and above the UL. And we have to end our for each loop and our if statement. So we're going to do PHP opening and closing. And then for this one, we're going to say end for each. And parentheses. And then copy this. Go below here. And we'll say end if. We could also end our if statement. So we'll say end if. And semicolon again. All right, so let's refresh our page, see if it's working now. Cool. And as you can see, guys, look at that. We have our tasks from the actual database showing up here. So if we add another task, let's see if it shows up. So let's say go to mall. Look at that, go to mall is there. And then it should also be in our database. And so let's refresh our database page. Remember, we always have to refresh every time we change stuff. And there it is, go to mall. Now our buttons, even though we just made some logic for our buttons, remember our buttons are going to two separate files now, delete and toggle.php that don't exist yet. So those aren't going to work yet, but we're going to make those work next, and we'll start with our toggle button. So let's go back in here and let's create our toggle.php file. So let's say new file. Call it toggle.php. And the reason why we're calling it toggle, guys, is because you can click this and check it and uncheck it. So like you're going to toggle between or switch states of crossing it off and uncrossing it, and everything that'll reflect everything. And it'll also reflect up here. So you'll see what I mean here. But toggle is just one of those programming words that's what it means. Like you can basically change the state or how something looks by clicking a button multiple times. So we're here in our toggle. Let's do our opening PHP tag, closing PHP, and let's just make this full screen for you guys. And remember, we need to include our database, so let's go copy this require database code and paste it right there. And now we need to write some code that will get the ID from our hidden input that we put in for both of them, but first we're doing the toggle one. So we're going to say get the ID from the hidden input, and we're going to say create a variable called task underscore ID, and that's going to be equal to, remember we want it to be an integer, so we're going to say int in parentheses, then we're going to make more parentheses, we're going to say post, and then brackets, and then we're going to say ID. And then we're going to use our two question marks, which is, remember, it's called the null coalescing operator, and then we'll put 0. Okay? So what our task ID variable is saying here is it's either going to be equal to the ID that we get from the post method from our database, or if not, it's going to be equal to false or 0. Same thing. So it's either going to be crossed out or not crossed out. So 1 is yes, they toggled it, cross it out. 0 means no, leave it as it is. So let's go down here to our next line. And now we're going to write some logic to actually show on screen if the task is completed yet. So we're going to do that with a little if statement again. So we'll just say if valid ID flip the is done value from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, because they can toggle the button and make it true, false, false, true as much as they want. So we can say if task underscore ID is greater than 0, so basically if it's true, right, because 0 means false, we're going to say MySQLi underscore query, and then in between these parentheses, we're going to pass in our MySQLi connection. We're going to say go to the database, and now we're going to query it. So we're going to tell it what to do. We're going to say update to-dos. So now we're basically writing SQL in our PHP. So update to-dos, set is done, which is one of our rows, equal to if parentheses is underscore done equals 1, 0, 1, and then closing parenthesis. And then we'll say where ID is equal to whatever the task ID is for that task. And then after all of that, we got to put our, put our semicolon in the wrong area. Got to go right here. And then after all of that, we're going to redirect, because remember, all this is happening every time we toggle, click buttons and stuff. We're just submitting forms over and over again to the database, and then we're dynamically updating the page. We're basically just submitting and refreshing the page over and over again. So every time we submit the form and toggle this, we have to redirect it back to index.php, the page that you're already on, with a fresh version of what the page is supposed to look like. So down here, we have to redirect it again. We have to use that header again. So we have to say header, single parentheses, location, index.php. So we're basically sending them back to the pages they're already on, but we're refreshing it for them so that it looks how it should. And remember, after you redirect, you always have to do your exit to stop running the script and for security. So again, in this part here, basically in plain English, you got to understand that right here in these parentheses, guys, we're not in PHP anymore. We're actually updating the database, and we're writing SQL. So you can write SQL in PHP because it's built to work with it and many other databases. That's what's so cool about PHP. So in these parentheses, we are now in SQL, and we're saying in plain English, we're just saying, hey, update our database table with this SQL command. And then we're saying update our to-dos set is done. So go into our is done row. Now this if, this capital IF, and then the parentheses that everything is wrapped in, is a built-in function for SQL, okay? And what this says is if it's true, flip it to false. If false, flip it to true. So basically this little piece of functionality here says if the person keeps clicking it, keep switching what it is. So if it's true, switch it to false. If it's false, switch it to true. 1, 0, 1. Remember, 1 is true, false, true. So it's basically saying let it toggle true or not true, and keep updating the database every time they click it until they delete the thing. You have to put up with them constantly changing their mind if it's done or not, if that's what they want to do. Okay? And then we're saying where are we getting this information from? Well, we're getting it from the task ID, which remember, our task ID is being passed through our hidden input for each button. It's a hidden input that will not show up on the screen. Okay, and it's just passing through what task we're on based on its ID, so that the database knows, because the database isn't going to know what words are in there or what the task is, but it is going to know what the ID is, and the ID pretty much unlocks everything, because that's what the task is. That's the key to what what it is. You see, guys, like programming and like all this stuff seems really complicated, but computers are really dumb. And programming, basically, when you break it down, all computers know, at least until quantum computing becomes a thing, which we're years and years away from still, is true, false, 0, 1, yes or no. That's all anything ever boils down to. So this all may look really complicated. All this code, especially for this toggle button, is just setting rules using PHP and then some SQL queries and an SQL function of saying like true, false, true, false, true, false. If this, then that. If this, then that. That's basically all there is to it. And as I'm talking here, I just realized I have a typo, guys. Our table is not to-dos. It's tasks. So let's change, make sure whatever your table name is, if you named it tasks like I did, make sure yours says tasks. And I think everything else looks good. Let's test this out and see if the button works. So let's click our button and see if it clicks, checks, crosses anything out. Okay, so it's working, but our class isn't going there. So as you can see, guys, we have 0 out of 5 tasks completed. If we check off go to mall, it's saying now that we have 1 completed, but we're not getting our line through. So let's see if we can debug that and find out why. So what we can check here first, guys, is so it looks like it's reflecting here that it's completed. So we can check our database to see, refresh it and see it should go from 0 to 1. See, is done, guys. By default is 0, which is false, but if we click it, it should be 1, which is true. And go to mall is 1. So hopefully that's all connecting the dots for you. Now this is done. Remember, then that's all that logic is coming from the first stuff, again, that we made up here, right here. Convert is done to integer 0 or 1 instead of 0, 1 string if it's 0 or 1. And then we used if statements to say if it's 0, it's false. If it's 1, it's true, and it is done. So flip it and then change the page that way. So hopefully that's all making sense. So that's good to go. So let's continue to debug here. So let's go to our page and see if done is part of our classes now. So if I right click and hit view page source, and we go down to our button, let's see, go to mall, button, icon, So li text yes and done is here. So it is there. So if we let's uncheck it really quick and see if done goes away. Now it says 0. Now let's right click. Let's get rid of this one. Let's view page source again, see if done disappeared. Yeah, now it's just li text, but that's okay. So something, I don't think this space should be here. Let's see if we can, is it there by default? Do I have a space there by accident? Because that might be breaking it. Maybe right there, save, might be that space right there. Let's see if that fixed it. Sometimes these weird things happen, guys, when you don't expect it. So let's say done. No, that didn't fix it. We might be missing a semicolon here. Let's try that. The littlest things in PHP will get you. All right. Boom. Boom. Let's do a hard refresh. Maybe we need to just hard refresh the page. There we go. It's working. So I had a space. I needed a semicolon here. And that fixed it, I think. And then I had to also do a hard refresh of the page to get my CSS to show. I don't know. Let's see if that did fix it or if I just had to hard refresh it all along. If I do that, save, refresh, hard refresh. And I guess it was mainly just the hard refresh, but this should be here. So we'll put it there. Cool. So see what that's doing now, guys? That functionality is working. Beautiful. All right, so now let's do our delete button. That's next. We're almost done. We just got to do our delete button and our delete all button, and this app is set. So let's go into our files now. We'll make this big again, and we're gonna make delete.php. And again, we'll copy our database connection, put that at the top. And I should probably make my opening and closing PHP tags so it'll actually work. Oops, so we'll say PHP opening, and this is a thing I'll teach you guys. PHP, if this is a PHP only page, All I really need to do is have PHP up here, the opening tag, and it'll actually work just fine. We don't have to put a closing tag, but I'm a stickler and I usually like to put a closing tag, but you can just have the opening PHP page tag on these logic only pages and it'll actually work just fine. So it's up to you. So now we're going to, first step, we're going to get the ID from the hidden input again. So it's basically going to be this same code that we just wrote. All we want to do is get the task ID from the hidden input. So we can just literally copy that over and paste that here. I've got to rewrite it. And then our next piece of code is going to be if valid ID. So if it's an actual task and the ID is valid, it's actually in the database, we're going to delete the task. Okay? Whoops, and let's spell valid right. So we're going to say if, and then we're going to pass in our task ID. Again, if it's greater than 0, which basically, remember, 0 is false, 1 is true. So basically, if the task ID is legit, if it's not false, we're going to say MySQL query, and we're going to say, we'll pass in our MySQL connection right here. Just copy that. Say MySQL query, MySQL, which is our database connection, comma. We're going to say, now we're going to go into SQL mode and we're going to delete. So we're going to say delete. Now we're writing SQL from to-dos where ID is equal to whatever the current task ID is. Okay, then we'll do a semicolon. Whoops. This is supposed to be a comma. And then again, we're going to redirect back to our page, to the page that we're on, just to refresh the page. So let's just copy that from here, header location index.php, and then exit. Save that. All right, so let's see if our delete button works now. So when we click delete, so let's refresh this. Let's give it a hard refresh. I'm going to do Command-Shift-R. It'll be Control-Shift-R if you're on Windows. Make sure you hard refresh it. Sometimes you have to do that. Let's see if we can delete go to them all. Okay, uncaught, MySQL exception, table full stack. Okay. So we're getting another error here. Delete PHP line 10. Doesn't know what we're talking about. So what did we do here? Oh, guys, I keep selecting. So I used to-dos in another project, and I keep like reverting back to that in my head. Should be tasks. That should fix it. Sorry about that, guys. That's what happens when you do this for pretty much a living and you have a bunch of projects going on. So you probably caught that before me. You guys are really smart. A lot of you are probably better coders than me. So sorry about that again. So now if we delete, so the one did delete. So I believe this is working. If we update our database, we deleted go to them all and it's gone. So let's see if we can do it without having a bug. Let's delete eat food. Gone. Refresh our database. It's gone. Okay. So our delete button is working. Let's delete workout. That's gone now. Refresh and it's gone. Okay. And then we can cross them both out. Hey, they're both done. Cool. Yay. All right. So that's our basic functionality. Let's just do our clear all task button now, our last thing that we have to do. So to do our clear all PHP, we have to again wrap our clear all button in another form. And like a little mini form. So let's go down here to our clear all button. And we're going to say form. And the action is going to go to clear.php. So we'll call it our new delete all file basically. And we're going to use the method of post. And then we'll put our bottom form tag in here below our actual button. And we'll nest our button. And now we just, that's really all I have to do is put this in another mini form so that when we submit this, it changes the page, right? That's what we've been doing. So let's go make a new file. And we'll call it clear.php. That's what we put, right? In our action. Yeah, clear.php. Okay. Just making sure. And again, let's add our database connection. So let's copy this. Put it up here. Let's write our PHP tags. We'll say PHP, closing PHP. And now we're just going to basically delete all from our to-dos table. That's all we really have to do. So what we'll do to that, so let's make a comment. We'll say delete all tasks from database and UI. So we're going to say MySQLi underscore query. And then we're going to pass in our database connection variable, which is, if we go to db.php, it's this one, MySQLi. So we named our connection variable. So just paste that in there so we don't have any typos. And then we're going to do a comma, and then we're going to say delete. Oh, actually, we're going to put quotes. My bad. So now we're, in these quotes, remember, now we're jumping into SQL really quick. So we're going to say really simple, delete from, and our table name is tasks, right? Let's not get that wrong. Let's get it right for once. Tasks, okay? And that's really all we have to do. We're just saying, hey, delete everything, man. Kill it. And then again, we're going to redirect it. So let's just copy and paste that. So let's go to here, copy our redirect so it refreshes the page automatically for our user, brings them back to the same page, and then exit to shut the script off. And that should be all we have to do. So let's see if this works. Let's do a hard refresh. Let's clear all tasks. Let's see. Button isn't working here. And so nothing's working here, guys. So you know what? I bet you we didn't make our button a submit type. And maybe you guys did. Yeah, see, like I have type of button here. Silly. Silly me. It's got to be a submit. Okay. I was like, why isn't the button doing anything? So now we only have, let's add a couple more tasks here. We'll say, oh, let's do a hard refresh first of all. And then we'll say this is a dynamic task. We'll add that again. We'll say work out. We'll say go to the mall. And then let's say we want to clear them all out. Boom. And then we just have our little message here. Remember when we made this little message in the beginning, add a task to get started by default in our if else statement? It's showing. So that's pretty cool because we didn't even test that now until now. So remember we did here, add a task to get started. We said, remember, if empty task rows, if there's no task basically, do this. And then we did our else statement. And remember, our if is right here, li text, add a task to get started. So that's working. Refresh our database, make sure that cleared out. And it did. All right, very cool. So our app is working. What I want to do now is just, I want to add some JavaScript into here briefly for our delete buttons so that we get a little like message that pops up. And I wanted to make this add a little bit of full stackness to this by just inserting a little bit of JavaScript in here so that, you know, it's a full stack app and you can see how JavaScript and PHP can work together. So let's just add that really quick. Maybe we'll just add it for the clear all task button just so you can see that, like how JavaScript would work in here. So we have our app.js. So let's just add, what we'll do, let's add an ID onto our form for our clear all button. So this little thing right here. And I like to select my stuff by IDs. You can, or sometimes I use query selector, either one, but I'm pretty old school. I like to select stuff by IDs when I use JavaScript. So I'm going to add an ID here, and I'm going to say clear-form as it will be our ID for the form. And then we'll go into our JavaScript and we'll say const. And I haven't written a lot of JavaScript lately, so this actually feels really good that I get to write some JavaScript. Kind of miss it. So I'll say const clear form will be the name of our variable. We'll say equals document dot get element by ID, and we're going to select it by clear form ID. Boom. All right, and then we're going to say clear form dot, we'll add an event listener, and we're going to add a submit event listener so that when we submit our form, it fires off. And then we'll make this simple. We'll make an anonymous unnamed function in here. So we'll just put it all together. We'll say function. We'll put our event parameter in here. And then we'll say e.prevent default so it doesn't submit right away. And then let's make another variable. We'll say const yes submit is what we'll call the variable. And that's going to be equal to confirm, which is basically a built-in little JavaScript function that like brings up that message that you've seen before. It's like, are you sure you want to do this? That's what confirm does in JavaScript. And we can say, are you sure you want to delete in all caps so And we'll put delete in all caps so they know, like, yo, you're about to delete everything, right? We want to draw their attention to that. We'll say, are you sure you want to delete all tasks? And then they'll have a cancel button. Confirm also, we'll like show them a cancel button too. So it'll say confirm cancel basically. Okay. So are you sure you want to delete all tasks? And then if they don't want to do yes submit, if they cancel, we'll actually put our e.prevent default right in there so that the form doesn't submit. That should work. Let's see. Let's see. And we don't need to add our semicolons everywhere with JavaScript, but it's good practice to get into since we have to do it with PHP, right? See if that works. So let's go back to our page. Let's do a hard refresh. Let's add some tasks. Okay, we'll add 3 tasks. Let's see if we clear all. Yeah, there we go. Now we're getting that little confirm from JavaScript popping up. Are you sure you want to delete all tasks? Now if we hit cancel, it'll prevent default will fire off, and then it won't do anything, and then we can just continue on. We can cross out tasks. We can delete them one by one. Now we can go back here and say, hey, we do want to clear all tasks. Yes, okay. Boom, they'll all be gone. Your database is empty. All right. So that's it, guys. That's our full stack app. And I know, like, you can be like, dude, we barely added any JavaScript, but hey, it's still full stack. We have every language in here now, and you can see how adding JavaScript, like if you already know JavaScript, you probably already know like other places that you could add it. But remember, JavaScript is really just, I know nowadays it's used for the back end a lot and a bunch of stuff that it wasn't meant to do. JavaScript at its core, guys, it's just supposed to be client side front end changes to a page, man. The trend nowadays is to try to force it into the back end with Node and all that. If you've ever worked with the Node ecosystem as a developer, you know it's a cluster, you know what. Cluster F word. It's it's messed up, dude. It's not very nice to work with. PHP again was built for the web, built for the back end. If you enjoyed building this project and you want to learn PHP full stack, maybe this is your first little glimpse of what that is. I do have, again, shameless plug, a complete web developer course that will take you all the way from learning how the web works to HTML, CSS, then JavaScript, and finally PHP. It's completely project-based, so we don't have any boring theory. You'll build like between 20 and 30 projects total between HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP to learn how all the languages work. And the projects are they're not super huge projects. The biggest one at the end is we build our own content management system, or CMS, with PHP. And that's where we basically build our own little mini version of WordPress. And it's really fun. It's a really fun project. It shows you a lot. There's 58 sections, 426 lessons. Don't let that scare you. Most of my videos are 5 minutes or less, and I do that on purpose because the best way to learn, again, is just through little bite-sized projects. You don't want to be spending 1 hour on one video, especially as a newbie. It's a terrible thing. I did it when I was first learning. Pretty much all the course instructors out there did stuff like that. They still do it today. It's a terrible way to teach. It's a terrible way to learn. So as you can see, those I just scroll through, give you a little preview. Everything that we do is pretty much projects, guys. We don't mess around. I want to get you guys building and out there building your own stuff as fast as possible. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I will see you in the next video.